Hello, curious friends. Welcome to Building Your Breast Brain podcast. My name's Sylvie, and today we're going to be continuing on the theme that we've done the past 2 weeks, which is another episode on the balanced brain. So, like I mentioned before, this is a series that is kind of like a layered cake. So, you can definitely enjoy the layers one at a time. But there is a little bit of an element of building on each other to kind of decrease the depth of our knowledge when it comes to the neuroscience behind what is a balanced brain. So this whole series is really dedicated towards building, creating, guiding our brains to be balanced. And what that means is that it's not a brain that doesn't have any obstacles. It's not a brain that doesn't experience any stress. It's not a brain that is a perfect brain, but it's a flexible enough brain that we're able to transition back to a balanced, neutral, restorative, in science we like to call homeostatic state more easily. And what is the science behind it, and what are the practical tools to actually get us there? And so where we're at right now is we've talked a little bit about boredom in the brain, in particular when it comes to productivity, being able to problem solve, think of creative solutions. And the last one that we talked about was around plasticity, which is a lot of fun. Neuroplasticity, what it really means, how we tap into it, and how does it relate to when it comes to having a flexible brain. Now, this one really holds near and dear to my heart. If you don't know, I am finishing my PhD in neuroscience. This is actually going to be the last episode I put out because I'll be defending my PhD in 2 weeks. So I'm going to be switching gears briefly, and then I promise I'll be back continuing with the balanced brain, giving you updates on my PhD defense, as well as getting the August webinar rolling. So stay tuned for that. But I've been teaching yoga and meditation throughout my entire PhD. And I'd also, a big part of my business fusing, which I won't get into right now, fusing EEGs with meditation, presence, which some people may call mindfulness, but being present to me, and the more that they work with people, the more that I go through my blocks, I truly believe this to be the case. Presence is not just a spiritual practice. Being present is not just a spiritual practice. Being present is a brain health measure. Being present, you're like, stop repeating yourself. No. Being present is a brain health measure, and being present is truly a key component when it comes to having a balanced brain. Now, before I dive into the science behind why that's the case, what brain areas are activated when you're present, and why I believe this is such a key component to be able to regulate your stress, to be able to be productive, to be able to show up as yourself, your fully resourced self, is I'll unpack a few stories. Now, I did talk a little bit about how important being present was when it came to writing my thesis. I'll leave that in the show notes. I won't get into it now, but it was actually a really big component for me to be able to do it. If I was not able to come back to a present state, I 110% would not have been able to complete my PhD thesis in the timeline that I had set. I would have definitely delayed it a semester. Probably not two, but definitely one semester. A key, when I think of my life and how this really showed itself to be true, not because I was doing it right, because I was doing it all wrong, is when it came to my dating life. So some of you may know, some of you may not know, I've been with my current partner for 3 years. We have been living together for a year. We're in a very serious, committed relationship. And before that, I was in a relationship. My previous relationships never lasted more than 2 years, which is a whole other topic on its own. I'm not going to be talking about that. You're like, tell us more. You're going to have to ask for it. So I'm trying to think. It would have been the last relationship I had till the current one was around 4 years. I was single for 4 years and was actively dating for those 4 years. I didn't like, maybe I would take like a few months off of the dating apps because I know that being on the dating apps can be quite exhausting. It can feel like a lot of effort with not a lot of reward, and can feel like there's a lot of luck involved. But during that time, I was actively dating, would maybe take a few weeks off at a time. And I was noticing a really particular pattern with my dating that was really harmful for my brain health, in the sense that I was getting extremely triggered. I was exhausting myself. And there was this clear cycle that was repeating that, after doing it for a few years, I was ready to shift it. And presence was a really big part of that, and a really big part of how I was able to have the wonderful partner that I have today and have the kind of relationship we have today. I know for a fact, and I think he's even kind of mentioned it indirectly, because I haven't talked about this directly with him. He's even kind of mentioned indirectly that if I had behaved or acted the way that I had previously, that it probably wouldn't have worked out in those early stages, which I'm not offended because I get it. Like, I really was getting in my own way. So let me unpack some juicy dating stories for you. So basically, when I would be on dating apps, I got to a point where I found the messaging back and forth not so bad. There was a point where even that I found really stressful because I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. But basically, I kind of recognized that, you're essentially going on a half blind date. Like, you don't know these people, you don't know their backstory, you don't know what context, what attitudes, what energy they're bringing to dating, right? And I mean, that's true even when you meet people, what we say, like out in the wild, or in person, that, it's a bit of a gamble because, some people are coming in who have worked on themselves, that are ready to date, that are ready for their next serious relationship. Other people that had just broken up with their exes and are looking to move on, but maybe not fully ready to move on, or looking to be distracted. Um, so anyway, I was messaging people, and what I found was quite smooth was I was really good at going on first dates. So I was really good at, letting the other person plan when to meet, and recognizing that anybody who really wants to meet me is going to make the effort, and that I was okay and happy with that. I wasn't out here trying to force people to come out on dates with me. If that's not what they wanted to do, no problem. And during the first dates, I was really present. I promise you there's a turning point. But in the first dates, I was really present because I recognized that this is a gamble. The only way you know if this person is a potential match for you is if you meet them in person. So here we were meeting in person, and I love to talk to people. And that's kind of how I saw it. I'd get to know somebody new. I'd get to maybe learn something new, gain a new perspective, maybe get to go to a new coffee shop, maybe get to try a new drink. And I kind of focused on that. And when I was in those dates, I was really in the present moment, right? Really listening to what the other person said, asking questions, you know, that kind of thing. And if it was, I would take a bit of time afterwards to see if in my body, right, or just how I felt, if I wanted to meet this person again. And if I did, that is when the tables turned. It didn't happen, it happened more than once, of course, right? Like, it didn't just happen when I met my partner. And there's definitely other interesting people out there in the world after a first date. Although I can see why my partner and I did end up sticking together. We're very, very similar. Anyway, I could talk about that guy for way too long. But, there's other people I met that after a first date, I was like, oh, this is interesting. I definitely want to go for a second date. And so I'd go for a second date. I'd be maybe a little bit more nervous, a little bit more pressure. Usually the second dates went fine. And if after that second date I wanted to see that person again, that is when the tables turned. That is when I was overanalyzing every single text message. That is when I would be in a complete chokehold throughout my day of when I was going to get a message back, right? Like I'd look at my phone and there'd be like almost like a zap in my heart with anxiety, or there'd be like a pit in my stomach. I was so worried about what they were going to say, if they were going to ask me out again, if they saw a future with me, if they didn't see a future with me. And what often happened was we would maybe go out for 4, 5, 6 dates even. And then inevitably they they never no, nobody ever ghosted me, and this only happened a few times, but it was something to the effect of that they did not, I guess they didn't see a future with me, but they didn't they didn't flat out say it, but something to the effect of that they weren't over their ex, or they weren't ready for a serious commitment. That is what I clearly wanted. And that, yeah, that they didn't want to waste my time. They didn't think it was the right time. They were maybe really busy. They didn't have time for that kind of commitment, that sort of thing. And this happened like 3 or 4 times in the span of like 2 years. And I'm like, okay, so either you guys are gonna laugh. Either I'm picking wrong or there's something wrong with how I'm approaching this. And, the maybe I'm picking wrong, there could be some validity in that, but I do believe that, and I have a whole series on this, the Inside Out Brain series, that if I were to show up in those dating situations a lot more regulated and a lot more present, that they probably would have gone a lot differently, honestly. Even if I didn't necessarily visibly act out as I was feeling on the inside, there are ways that other people can pick up how we are, what our heart rate's like, what our micro expressions are like, what our brain activity is like. It's truly remarkable. And what I noticed is once I started to like somebody, I would jump in the future right away and be constantly like pros, cons, hyper vigilant, filtering, looking for, is this person a good match to be my husband? Is this person a good match to be a father of my children? And let me tell you, date 2 or 3 is way too soon to be putting that much energy towards the future bucket. But I did, and that's where a lot of my anxiety came from, because I really wanted it to work out, or I really wanted it to be clear, or I was also very tired of dating at that time, so I really was putting a lot of pressure on those interactions because I wasn't present. I felt no pressure on a first date, literally none, literally could care less. But the second that I started thinking about a future with somebody, especially in those early days, then the pressure just skyrocketed. And I was extremely stressed out. And it bled not just in those interactions, but throughout my entire day, where I would get breakouts, I would get, stomach issues, and I would feel exhausted, right? And I remember there was a time, and this is maybe a bit vulnerable for me, but this is really for the people out there that struggle or struggling with dating right now, or this is something that if you don't deal with this too throughout dating, that it can like pop up in your relationship, which is also why I took the time to nip this in the butt, because I knew that once I quote unquote secured a partner for long term, that this kind of thought pattern, stress activation was not going to go away. But the thing that I want to really touch on is that presence is a huge part that helped me date my current partner. And it's because I remember it was so interesting. I remember the first couple months we were dating, right? And for us, our first couple dates were spread out quite a bit. I was traveling quite a bit. It was summertime. It's always hard to date in the summertime. Our schedules are so busy. It was summertime. It was hard to schedule dates really close together. And it turns out that on his side, he told me later, he wasn't expecting to find somebody that he liked so much right away. So he also needed, and maybe this is like a male thing. I don't know. The males that are listening will have to let me know. But he also took a bit of time to kind of retreat and reflect, like, am I ready to make that next level commitment, which he did. But yeah, there was a lot of space between our dates, and there was a lot of really promising qualities that were being presented. There were also some things that I was maybe a little bit unsure about. And instead of trying to figure it all right then and there and staying in that future bucket, I took every date, every time we hung out as like a piece of data basically, right? And just kind of let it be what it was. I do think that when we future trip, that there's an element of us needing to control. And I remember with my current partner that there were some things that he presented that I wasn't sure about. And I was like, you're not going to say anything? Wild, I know. You're not going to say anything. You're just going to sit there. You're going to observe. You're going to be present. You're going to ask questions. You're going to see what happens. And what was really beautiful is as more time passed, a lot of those things naturally resolved itself, honestly. And the things that I love about my partner that I was noticing in the beginning really continued to flourish and become apparent. And then all of a sudden, right? We're going on trips together, we're committed to each other, we're living together. And it's no accident that it evolved that way because I decided for the first couple months of dating, I was not going to try and figure out if he was going to be the future father of my children or my husband. I was rooting for him. I was like, this guy has a lot of great qualities that I think definitely could fit, but I'm not going to force him. I'm just not going to force him. And I'm going to enjoy the time we have together. And that, because I have almost no doubt in my mind, especially with him saying that, he met me, he really liked me. It freaked him out a little bit that if I started to apply pressure, if I started to ruminate about the future together and putting pressure on myself and urgency and freaking out about whether he's going to plan another date or not, that he would have maybe cut it early. I don't know if he'll ever tell me that. I don't know if we can ever really answer that, but that is my prediction because I would have been in such a hypervigilant stress state. And a lot of that stress is coming from jumping in the future. And what I noticed with presence in particular is that the analogy I like to use is to think of it like a scale, like, the Libra scale, the weight scales, and think of, what side is this? This is where, so side tangent, but when I teach yoga, I actually struggle with my left and right so much. And any class where I use a lot of left or rights, I just feel my students are so, they are so, what do you call it? Compassionate. They're so gracious as I struggle with my left and rights. Anyway, so let's say this is the right side. The right side is the future, left side is the past. And because I'm recording this, it might be mirrored or I might just be getting it wrong. It's okay. Presence is right in the center. So when you're in the center, you're spending your energy. I like to think of it, your energy really almost like in a clean, equal, homeostatic way. Now you can have like some thoughts in the future and some thoughts in the past, but you kind of even out in the middle. But if you spend too much of your energy on the future, right, your energy scale is going to tip and deplete you. And the same goes for the past, right? So that's not something that I talked about a lot about, but it is something in my journey I've experienced. And I know a lot of people experience where they, tipping over to the other side, ruminate a lot about the past actions, past decisions, past regrets, past worries, right? And what happens is that you don't get to choose. This is the big thing. You don't get to choose where you're spending your energy as well. And there is a specific, what we call network in the brain that's actually responsible for this. And so I'll talk about two of them. I'll kind of talk about, the jumping in the future and the past, what network that is. And then I'll talk about what I suspect, right? Because studies aren't really using this kind of language, although there are quite a few studies on mindfulness and, in particular, how to use mindfulness for conditions like anxiety and depression. And while I do think there's a lot of value there, I do believe that there is a missing piece, right? Because often when we say, just be present, just be mindful, it's really hard to put into practice. And I promise you at the end of this episode, I will unpack what is the practical component to this that can help you start making this switch in your brain. I'm talking about areas of the brain that are active at the same time. And so we call that what we call functional connectivity in the brain. So it's not necessarily that these structures have synaptic connections, right? That they're not physically connected, but that they turn on at the same time when a specific task happens. So when it comes to jumping in the future, jumping in the past, science often believes that the default mode network is involved in this. The default mode network is involved in a lot of internal thinking, so thoughts about yourself. And this has been studied in the context of depression for thought rumination. And so when you're focusing internally on yourself, the default mode network turns on. Now, if you've been following along this series, you might be like, hold up. We talked about the bored brain. We talked about the default mode network. And you were saying that it's, a good thing to use the default mode network. This is where there's a lot of nuance in science and a lot of the same structures, depending on the context that they're activated, can be what we call adaptive, right? They can have a positive, is aspect the right word? A positive change or a positive force. There we go, positive force in your brain. But they can also, those exact same structures, depending on the context, can be maladaptive. So definitely, if you haven't checked it out, check out the bored brain because it actually plays really nicely with what I'm talking about here. But essentially, the default mode network, when it's active for too long, and especially this is, the activity that's happening when you're jumping ahead, when you're looking behind. And those structures, which I mentioned in that episode, I also mentioned in the brain fundamentals, which I'll put below, that is where your energy is going. That is where your brain is spending its energy. Now, what happens when you switch and you jump into a present state? You turn on a different network. Now, there's two networks that turn on, but I'm going to focus on one, do a deep dive on one in particular. The first network that will turn on is your saliency network. And these are structures that involve you paying attention to what's new in the environment. So a really good example of this is scrolling on your phone. That is using your saliency network all the time. And while that network is important, right, it's important to pick up differences in our environment. Really, the network that's after that, which is the one I want to focus on, which I believe is the one that is the most active with true presence is our central executive network. This is the network where we have the ultimate focus. And to me, presence is the ability to focus on the present moment, to not jump in the future, to not jump in the past, to not multitask while you're trying to do something else, but to focus on one thing at a time. And the main functions of our central executive network is, planning, decision making, sustained attention, problem solving, the ability to eliminate distractions, have abstract, thoughts, problem solve, and the default, whoopsies, not the default mode network. It's so fun because I don't get to talk about the central executive network that much, but it's a really powerful one. And it branches out to many areas of the brain, but in terms of what is the best studied, there's two areas of the brain in which when you're doing the sustained focus and true presence, the central network turns on. So I'm sure I don't even have to tell you this, but one of the major brain regions is, of course, in the front of the brain, right? This is where our executive functions are, our attention. And there's a particular group of cells in a very particular part of the brain called the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex, which is the front, and it's also the top of our brain. And what this area really does is that it helps you figure out what you need to be paying attention to, right? So if we use the example briefly of the saliency network, when, we're scrolling on our phone, we're constantly being like, this is different, this is different, this is different, this is different, right? So it's constantly being turned on, but the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex decides, I'm actually going to watch this, right? And I'm actually going to focus on it. That's where that switch comes in. And so that can really help when it comes to decision making. It can help when it comes to prioritizing. And it really helps when it comes to when I think of mental flexibility. Because when I think of that scale we have, right, of future, past, present, right, I almost see it as like teetering, 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 teetering. And then once it's in the middle, right, everything stops moving. So when you are scanning your environment, figuring out what you're paying attention to, that mental flexibility kind of locks you in, right? So the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex helps you figure out what it is that you want to pay attention to. This goes for our thoughts. Honestly, the central executive network, if you can get that stronger, you have a lot of control over your mental state and your thoughts. What are the thoughts that you're going to be paying attention to? What are the thoughts that you are going to lock in on? And so when this area is damaged, or is underactive, some of the key things that you'll notice, right, is that you feel disorganized, unable to plan, unable to focus, and unable to have that mental flexibility of, like I just did this, but now I'm like pushing that to the side and now I'm doing this, right? And that to me is really multitasking, is being able to switch from task to task. But multitasking, and this is something maybe for another day, I think is hurting our productivity so, so much. And I mean, I don't want to get into a rant about emails. I remember my days in corporate and my job was a coordinator job. So I did lots of meetings and I was constantly communicating and my inbox and messages were just crazy. And, like I managed it really well now looking back, but in terms of productivity, it would have been way more productive if I dealt with everybody's messages in a certain block, if I dealt with everybody's emails in a certain block, and if I didn't have the constant pings when I was in meetings. So if you notice that those are things that are coming up, then it might suggest to me that this practice that I'm about to present to you around presence could be a really great thing for your brain. The next area, right? So two areas that are really well studied, but of course there are more, is the posterior parietal cortex. Now, when the brain, like, we have organized the brain, we have the frontal area, and then we have the parietal right after. Yes, we have the parietal right after, we have the visual in the back, and we have the temporal underneath, and of course other structures. I'm being very crude in my analysis, but posterior is further towards the back. And what's cool about this area is that it helps with a lot of the integration of information, right? So the front of your brain, your dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex, helps with the choosing what to focus on, the filtering, the mental flexibility to lock into something new, whereas the posterior parietal cortex helps with a lot of the integration of the information. So things like working memory, spatial attention, integrating all the sensory information, being able to do mental math, for example, being able to have goal-directed attention, right? So kind of, like let's say a really good example, if we were to use, you know what? We're going to use an example, right, that's relevant to me right now. This is actually, I'm really happy, and it's funny how it works out this way. I'm recording this episode at this time because I am revamping my presence practice for the current situation, area, transitional phase that I'm in, which is the transition between finishing my PhD and starting the next chapter, right? The next chapter for my business, the next chapter job-wise, career-wise, next chapter for my relationship. I've been finding that while I'm dealing with it way better than I've ever dealt with any transitional phase ever in my entire life. Being in transition would have crippled me years ago. And you can see and hear I'm not crippled, but I do find that I jump in the future a lot, to the point that I'm showing up to my days more depleted than I'd like, especially when it comes to having fun, having joy, having pleasure. This is something that I've noticed has really taken a back seat. And I'm not worried because of the tools I have and how I'm going to revamp it. But if we were to use this example of being in a transition phase, um, this area of the brain helps you figure out what to focus on and like what actions to do, right? So the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex helps you lock in, right? It helps you lock in on what you want to be focusing on. But then in terms of what to do next, what to read next, what to look up next, like what, for example, for me, like what jobs to apply for, what emails to send out to my email list, right? Like all those kind of come from this activity with the posterior parietal cortex, right? And that's where like the ideas and action steps come in. And when you're in the default mode network, which I have been, right, kind of thinking about basically being distracted by thoughts related to, what is my career going to look like? What are the next steps for my business? Where are my partner and I going to live in a year from now, right? Like having those float around in my brain, it does take away from the thoughts that I do want to focus on. It takes away from the actions that are actually going to help me, sorry for the snort, with the next phase of my life. And so how presence plays into this is that it gives you a point of focus. It gives you a nice, and I call it clean, not because there's something wrong with the default mode network or there's something wrong with, thinking about the future and the past, but I say clean because often what I notice, and it's part of the reason why I feel depleted as I do, is that I'm still showing up to do my tasks, right? You're still getting emails from me, podcast. I am in an internship right now. I am defending my thesis, but it all feels slower. It feels like not even slower, but that it's a bit heavier. It's more challenging. It's like a wet, not a wet blanket, but like a heavy blanket's been thrown on me and I'm asked to do everything that I'm doing and it just feels heavier. And I really noticed this a few days ago and I'm not freaked out by it. I am getting curious about it. And this is where presence comes in and the practice comes in. So, what happened in my case, right, is I was noticing that things were feeling heavier. I was having less energy, even though the amount of work I'm doing is not necessarily more. Like I found when I was doing brain training, finishing up my PhD experiments, writing my PhD, teaching yoga, I had a lot of energy. And a part of it was I was really dialed into the present moment and just taking it one step at a time, which is not what I'm doing now, right? I'm jumping in the future. But basically the first step I do once I feel this way is track where my thoughts are going. So either notes app on your phone or a journal. I would do a little T chart of like past and future. And anytime I caught a thought, right? Because there's a lot of thoughts that we don't catch that we're not aware of, I would write it down. And I did that for like maybe 2 days to just get a sense of where the trend is. And by far for me, the trend was in the future. My thoughts were always being directed towards the future and taking away from what I'm doing now. And so that already is a first big step. It's a really big step because you know where to shift. And that's where I find the like just be mindful, just be present is a bit lacking because if we don't know where our thoughts are going, how do we know to direct them to the present moment? That's my I guess, not even critique, but that's kind of a thought that I have around the practice because we're really like people are smart. People are smart. People people's brains are really quite remarkable. There's a bit of a almost like a BS detector with the brain if somebody tells you just be present and then you try just being present and it doesn't work. Me telling you to do it now, even with a bit of science, I think that that does help with the belief, but you're kind of like, "Okay, but I've done that. I've tried that. It's not working." First step is to figure out where your thoughts are going. Second step is to look at your thoughts and try and figure out what is so threatening about them because and the boredom episode is a great example of the default mode network being adaptive, right? Being a great thing to tap into. And in this case, right, the case that I have right now, my default mode network is activating my stress response. And I need to look at why it's doing that if I want to make a meaningful shift. And so when I look at all the thoughts around my future, I have to look at what I'm afraid of. I have to look at what's threatening. And what's really cool is that a lot of times we think we're scared of a lot of things, but often we're just scared of like one or two things, which is great because then you know exactly what to put your energy towards to shift it, to help you be able to do that energy balancing act, that scale of being in the middle and being present. And for me, it's really I did this work this morning, so it's a bit fresh. What's really interesting is that the fear underlying me jumping in the future so much is that I feel like I can't be happy if I don't have everything figured out, which is so funny because this is just such the paradox of life is that we have everything figured out, but nothing figured out all at the same time. And so I have a bunch of tools. I'll be doing them. I am happy to do an episode where I get back to you guys on this because one of the goals I had of this time of just finishing my PhD in general, right, is that people say that it's so stressful and it's so stressful for many like valid reasons, but I refuse to take that as the norm and I'm actively working towards it being a really pleasurable, you know, easy and fun experience. And there's many instances where I've had that, but I got to tell you guys right now, as I'm approaching my defense, I'm in a season where it is feeling heavier than I want it to feel. And so I'll be using quite a few of my tools to really unpack and debunk and convince my brain that I can be happy without having everything figured out. And that there is a lot of things in my life right now. And even if I'm unemployed for months, there are a lot of things that I can be incredibly, ridiculously happy about. And so for you guys, what I'd like you to do is if you find that you've identified with this episode, you've identified with the examples, you do feel like your default mode network is maybe activated and it's maladaptive and you want to turn on that central executive network and you want to be present, but there's something blocking you, start with that exercise. Start with the past versus future and tracking where your thoughts are going. Once you've done that, review your thoughts. See if you can figure out what is the central fear behind it and start to shift that. Now, if any part of this episode brings up more questions or something doesn't make sense or you'd like more examples, please either leave a comment below or send me an email with your question, hello@synapticsylvie.com. You can find my email on my website. And really, the best place to unpack a lot of this is in my free webinars. The next one is going to be in August. I haven't decided on the topic yet. There's been a few requests that I'm mulling over. So if you want to put your little request in the bag or in the hat, I would be happy to review it. These are where I answer your questions. We dive into an aspect of neuroscience in a deeper way than we do on the podcast. And it's all about your questions to dive into the topic deeper, but in particular, where I find this information is most useful and most challenging to communicate, especially in settings that are not one-on-one, is how to apply this information in your life. So figuring out, what you've done, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and what is your next step or how do we break through your next block? The last one that I did in July was all about the your brain during unpredictable times. And that brought out some really cool questions. And we talked about different areas of the brain and really cool studies. So if that's something you're interested in the link below, you can sign up for my newsletter, and that's where the dates will come out for the webinars. It's the only place they'll be. And my email list is strictly free resources. So if you're worried about somebody spamming you to spend money, I'm not your girl for better or for worse. You can check the details down below. The webinars are called Pick My Brain webinars. And the next time I will be on here will probably be 3 weeks, if you can believe it. Maybe sooner, who knows? Maybe I'll have a bout of inspiration, but I do have to, again, that multitasking, use my central executive network, switch gears and defend my thesis. But even while I'm preparing for my defense, I would love to hear from you guys and support you with this kind of work because I find that people that are attracted to this kind of work that are curious about their brain, how to get the most out of their brain, are people that are not allowing themselves to be victims and they're staying curious, they're staying hopeful, and those are the people that I love to help. You guys light my world up, so please don't be shy to leave a comment, to send an email, and I'll miss you guys, but I look forward to the next time that we get to expand on the balanced brain together. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I look forward to doing this again with you soon.